Day 16, or the HOA barbecue of public healing. There's a particular shade of suburban shame that shows up under Costco pavilion lights at 6 p.m. on a Sunday, right when the HOA president taps a microphone, and the propane grills sigh like bored dragons. That's where my closure happened, not in a therapist's office, not under a moon circle, in Sedona, where my wife claimed she needed exactly 15 days with her ex to heal. No, my healing began with a Costco churro in my left hand, a stack of notarized affidavits in my right, and a crowd of neighbors whose folding chairs formed a semicircle of American judgment. You could call the gathering a block party if you were generous, or a tribunal if you were honest. I'd invited everyone weeks ago under the subject line, Backyard Movie Night, True Crime Edition. I promised pulled pork and accountability. People showed up with coolers and curiosity, because this is a country where we will attend anything with free food and a hint of scandal. My wife, let's call her Marissa because that was, tragically, her name, arrived in a drapey linen outfit that said, "I have discovered boundaries," and a face that said, "I did not expect you to rent a projector." She stood beside River, the ex-boyfriend who had recently evolved into a somatic life coach, which is LA for unemployed charisma. He had a man bun, a crystal around his neck the size of a plum, and a tattoo of a Sanskrit syllable he mispronounced. They both looked like they'd just returned from the desert with enlightenment and dehydration. "This is insane," Marissa hissed when she realized I had set up an 8-foot screen and speakers that could rattle the HOA petunias. "This is revenge," I said, cheerful as a Little League dag-dad, because nothing says closure like a program and a merch table. The merch, to be clear, read, "Healing is not a timeshare." I offered sizes S through XXL. The projector warmed. The neighbors hushed. Even our dog, Pancake, a beagle mix with opinions, took a seat by the chips. And on screen appeared Day 1, The Healing Begins, footage I had edited into a documentary so crisp it could have premiered at a modest, ethically dubious film festival. There they were, Marissa and River, at a motel in Joshua Tree, pretending to be on a spiritual sabbatical, journaling about integrations and shadow work between room service charges and boomerangs of mezcal shots. My voiceover was tasteful, a Ken Burns parody narrated by me after 2 espresso shots. "In the high desert," I intoned, "where stars blanket the sky and lizards judge us from warm rocks, 2 adults, previously acquainted in sophomore anthropology, embarked on a pilgrimage called infidelity." A laugh bubbled through the cul-de-sac. Even Barb from Lot 12, who hasn't laughed since 2004, let out something like a squeak. Make no mistake, this was a betrayal, a cheating wife story baked at 375 degrees and basted with irony. But I had spent the 15 days of their healing time turning grief into cinema. The reverse order of events, a cold open at the barbecue, the climax unspooling first, fit the way my life felt. I'd been living in a plot twist for weeks. "We just needed closure," Marissa whispered to me, as if a Netflix crew hadn't already learned to spell my last name. "Closure is a door you shut," I said, "not a timeshare you tour for 15 days while your husband watches the dog and the mortgage." On screen, River gave a TED Talk into his phone titled, "Why Boundaries Are a Love Language." I added closed captions, "Says man who Venmo requests for gas." The neighbors laughed again, but the point wasn't just humiliation. It was truth. Truth in a nation of HOA, bylaws, and lemon bars, where we try to keep lawns and marriages equally neat. Truth that said, I had loved Marissa. I still love the idea of the family we were supposed to be. But love without honesty is just costume jewelry in harsh light. Also, and I cannot stress this enough, if you tell your spouse you need 15 days with an ex to heal, your spouse might buy a drone, a gimbal, and a copy of Final Cut Pro. Credits rolled on Part 1 receipts, and I set down my churro. "We're going to skip around," I told the crowd, breaking chronology because the whole thing already felt like a shuffled playlist. You've seen the ending. Now, let's watch how it began. I queued up footage of myself alone at the kitchen island on day 0, the night before she left, tidying and untidying the same stack of mail, a man reshelving his sanity. I looked generous in the soft light. It's amazing what a diffuser can do. My voice cracked in the audio track. I want to believe in a kind of love that can survive a midlife storm. I narrated. I want to be the person who says, go heal and come home, but I'm also the person who pays the electric bill. The neighbors nodded. A country knows a particular ache when duty meets desire, when family meets fantasy. And the camera panned to a note Marissa had left in looping script. Be patient with my growth. I wanted to write on the screen in highlighter, the plant you water is the one that grows. Instead, I let the silence do the work. The projector hummed. Cicadas rasped. Somewhere, a teenager tried to sneak a white claw and was denied by the judgment of 100 adults. We'll take a 10-minute intermission for brisket, I announced, then continue with the program. I had divided the documentary non-linearly, day 13 before day 4, day 7 after day 2. Because grief is not chronological, and neither is revenge. If you're thinking this was cruel, consider that my original plan had been far pettier. I'd drafted a PowerPoint called Cheating Wife, a case study with charts labeled Toxic Love Index and Return on Infidelity. This was kinder. It had jokes. It had empathy, if weaponized. Day -3 to day 8, or how to catch a somatic life coach with a beagle and a library card. 3 days before she left, Marissa turned a simple Tuesday into a TEDx event. We need space, as she said, to separate our identities. Watching her fold athleisure into a suitcase like she was packing dignity, I tried to be American about it, conciliatory, therapized, using the vocabulary of the coastal podcasts. But my gut, that old patriotic organ, said the word nobody wants to say out loud: cheating. We had been a decent family, ordinary in the way a well-balanced washer hums through a laundry cycle. Dinner kits, bowling leagues, target runs that turned into minor wars about throw pillows. When she mentioned her ex-River, with whom she'd reconnected via a closure call, I heard a faint ripping sound, like a coupon tearing off a Sunday insert. His name alone sounded like a lifestyle brand that sells small-batch betrayal. I did not jump to conclusions. I consulted Aunt Linda, who is not my aunt but a retired librarian with surveillance talents that should be studied by Langley. She once located a lost cat by recognizing a shadow pattern in a Ring camera reflection. Linda took one look at Marissa's healing itinerary, which included breath work, sound baths, and 2 nights at a place called the Cactus Palace, and said, "Honey, that's a boyfriend spa." She helped me build a spreadsheet. We called it Project Honesty. A surprisingly legal amount of what you need to know about a person can be found using public records, hotel rewards numbers, and the data exhaust of modern life. My contribution was pancake. I hid an AirTag in his collar because there was no way Marissa would leave without visiting him during her healing, given that she loved him as a proxy for the future child we never had. I also added an AirTag to her carry-on, not in a creepy way, in a "you left your passport once, and I'm still helping" way. She accepted the gesture, kissed my cheek like a publicist after a successful press tour, and drove off in the Subaru, a car whose cup holders still smelled like our past. Day 1, the AirTag dinged near Joshua Tree. Day 2, a charge hit our joint card from a store called Oracle and Oat Milk. Day 3, a photo appeared in a tagged story on someone else's Instagram. A man bun, a crystal, and Marissa's shoulder reflected in the window of a tapas place. River was taller than memory and shorter than accountability. I felt the seesaw of betrayal in my chest. Infidelity is arithmetic done with a broken calculator. every number feels like a lie. So I stayed busy. I joined a healing forum under an alias and learned the language: inner child, container, rupture repair. I watched 3 hours of YouTube on narcissism. I fell asleep to a podcast called Better Boundaries Now, with a host who said, like she was tasting sauces. But here's the conspiracy curveball that cracked the case. River was not just a life coach. He was also selling membership in something called the Full Moon Brotherhood, a men's group/MLM that promised primal reclamation and financial sovereignty for $222 a month. The site showed testimonials from men standing in Rivers screaming. One of them was holding what appeared to be a Bluetooth speaker. I felt terrible and relieved at once. Terrible because this is the diet soda of cults that preys on lonely egos. Relieved because nothing cures a broken heart faster than the clarity that your rival is a pyramid scheme with abs. Day 4, Aunt Linda drove out to the desert to birdwatch and got a room at the Cactus Palace, which turned out to be a motel that had rebranded mid-pandemic with macrame and a salt lamp. She found River leading a moon circle by the ice machine. Day 5, Pancake's AirTag pinged behind the motel where Marissa snuck out to coo at him. She whispered to him about her inner ache and her family scripts. Pancake wagged with bipartisan generosity. My love for her pulsed like a phantom limb and then receded. Day 6, I hit a wall. Grief is physical. It aches behind your ribs, a little shiver of nausea every time you picture their faces close. So I did what 1,000 husbands do in 1,000 strip mall parking lots. I sat in my truck, ate a breakfast burrito, and decided to do something instead of just feel something. I made 2 calls, one to a lawyer named Cassidy, who wears pearl studs like honest bullets and specializes in compassionate surgical divorce. One to a graphic designer on Fiverr. The designer delivered a logo by lunch. The lawyer delivered a strategy by dinner. No fire, Cassidy said. Water, we erode. We take back accounts they've been secretly siphoning. We shelter assets. We set a paper trail even a judge in an impatient mood can follow, revenge accomplished entirely by procedure. I slept for the first time in a week. Day 7, I bought a drone. It is legal in California, within limit, to fly a drone over public land and photograph what your therapist would call patterns. I filmed River lying about a retreat grant that didn't exist. I filmed him in a parking lot leading a breathwork immersion from the trunk of a Prius. I filmed the Cactus Palace's manager telling 2 Moon brothers they couldn't use the laundry room for clay rituals. Day 8, I found the radius of my dignity and marked it like a crime scene. If she came back, I would listen, but I would not forget. I would not romanticize healing that was really cheating. If she didn't come back, I would still have a dog, a lawn the HOA admired, and a collection of footage that would one day make a very good barbecue. Day 9 to day 15, or The Gentle Art of Procedural Revenge. By day 9, I had a project plan. I gave it a name because Americans name things when they want them to matter. Operation Lemonade. The mission statement: transform betrayal into a civic service. In a nation addicted to scandal podcasts, why not make ours a teachable episode? I opened a Google Doc and wrote sections. Evidence, narrative, legedi. Logistics, hospitality. Hospitality because nothing leaves a sweeter aftertaste on revenge than good brisket. Under evidence, Aunt Linda and I compiled hotel receipts, Instagram stories, Venmo requests, and that spiritual itinerary of sound baths that read like an alibi printed by Etsy. Under narrative, I sketched the nonlinear arc. Start with the end, the HOA barbecue. Flash back to the quiet of the kitchen, ping-pong through the desert days, return to the end with the clarity of context. It's almost biblical. We love a story that circles back with upgraded truth. Under legal, Cassidy coached me through steps that felt unromantic and unstoppable. Separate accounts, temporary support calculations, protecting the house. I did not freeze her out of money. I froze out the river of cash flowing to river. She would have enough to live. She would not have enough to finance someone else's enlightenment. Under logistics, I built the event. You cannot pronounce justice on a neighborhood scale without an RSVP system, a cooler plan, and a designated teen to tell other teens that, no, they cannot have your IPA. I got a permit for a screen on our cul-de-sac green. I borrowed speakers from the high school theater booster who owed me a favor after I once pretended to be the fire marshal so their musical could run long. Under hospitality, I called my friend Dion, who runs a barbecue truck called Holy Smoke. He said he'd cater if I let him name a sandwich after the occasion. We settled on the closure, pulled pork with pickles and a righteous slaw. Day 10, I floated a test balloon in the group text. Anyone up for a Sunday film night? The block responded with the buzzing energy of a town that hasn't had a good scandal since the splash pad chlorine incident of 2019. People volunteered cookies, extension cords, a spare screen. Barb, our HOA treasurer, offered to MC. I'll wear my pearls, she said, because some women arm themselves with accessories. Day 11, River hosted an online workshop called Boundary Boot Camp and accidentally left it public. I recorded the whole thing. He told a group of men to speak their truth by sending their mothers invoices for childhood wounds. He offered a premium tier called Sovereign Kingship. He used the word accountability as if it were a scented candle. Day 12, I visited my in-laws, still my in-laws for now, and told them the truth kindly. They looked tired enough to pass for art. Her mother cried into a napkin as if squeezing out 40 years of polite stoicism. Her father stared at the kitchen clock like it was a judge he could bribe. She's always chased a feeling, he said. She thinks if she stands in the right light, she'll become the person the light expects. He hugged me hard. You deserve better, he said, and I cried on a patio with a man who grills steak the way veterans explain maps. Day 13, the Brotherhood moved their circle to a rented yurt outside Yucca Valley. Linda parked at a distance and recorded 3 men grunting toward a sunrise. In the background, Marissa laughed at something River said, and then stopped laughing so fast you could hear the brake squeal in her throat. Maybe she saw herself from the outside for a second. Maybe she pictured the barbecue. Day 14, Cassidy filed paperwork that clicked into place like a new Lego set. I signed things that made me feel both protected and very, very 36. In the evening, I wrote my introduction for the film, a speech that would walk the cul-de-sac from shock to compassion without making me sound like a saint or a doormat. I rehearsed with Pancake, who offered notes in the form of sighs. Day 15, Marissa texted, "Coming home tomorrow, so much clarity." I typed and deleted 4 replies, then landed on one. "I'm hosting a neighborhood gathering at 6. I'd like you to be there." She sent a heart emoji and then God bless America, a sparkle. I turned off my phone. That night I could not sleep. Revenge isn't rest, it's caffeine. I lay in the dark and thought about the early days, her laugh, the apartment with the bad mattress and the window that stuck in summer. The first time she called my mother just to ask a recipe, and not because she needed moral permission. You don't marry a monster, you marry a person who looks at you like you are a secret she wants to keep. Then months grind, life crowds, and somewhere along the way, you both start auditioning for roles you didn't want to play. I wanted to wake up different. I didn't. I woke up myself, and that had to be enough. I iced the beer, tested the levels, cued the footage, and left a bowl for Pancake near the dais. At 5:30, smoke curled from Dion's trailer like a ritual. At 5:45, the screen stood tall on the grass. At 5:55, the block gathered. Humans, lawn chairs, America. At 6 o'clock, I shook out my hands and waited for the final scene in a story that had started with a sentence I still couldn't believe. I need 15 days with my ex to heal. Aftermath, regret, and the slightly conspiratorial epilogue. You already know how the barbecue began. What you didn't see on the screen was the moment afterward, when the last slide faded and the projector clicked cool and the crickets got their soundstage back. There was a silence, the kind reserved for funerals and fireworks. Then Barb, in pearls and the authority of a woman who has balanced 4 decades of budgets and marriages, said, "Well," like a gavel. She thanked everyone for coming. She reminded people to put their trash in the cans. Then she asked if anyone had questions, as if this were a city council meeting about potholes and not the story of my family detouring into a ditch. No one asked a question. Sometimes a neighborhood knows when the only decent response is casserole. People lined up for the closure sandwiches and put hands on my shoulder and told me to call if I needed anything, meaning ladders or company or both. Dayon pressed an extra tray into my arms. "For tomorrow," he said, "when the adrenaline drops and you realize there's no sandwich named future yet." Marissa stood, small in her linen, a woman whose soul-searching had detoured into souvenir shopping. River had the face of a man who was about to meet a world that does not accept store credit for moral debts. He tried to speak. I let him. "We never meant," he began, and I raised a hand like a traffic cop. "You meant," I said. "It just didn't mean what you wanted it to mean." I turned to Marissa. "We built a life, and you left it to chase a feeling. That's cheating. Not just bodies, but promises. That's infidelity. That's betrayal. I wanted to call it growth, but growth doesn't steal from a shared future. It doesn't ask for 15 days of toxic love and send me a bill." She cried then, real and messy. And because I am a person, not a script, I cried too. We stood there and made the ugliest sounds 2 people can make without being physically injured. "I'll sign whatever," she said. "I'll make it right." There's no making it right, only making it less wrong. Cassidy's paperwork would handle the math. The rest would be a slow unbraiding of habits. Whose mug is whose, who gets the plant that is technically hers, but secretly thrives only in my window because I talk to it about weather patterns. Somewhere, Pancake sneezed. River tried again. "I just wanted to help her heal," he said, pronouncing heal like a brand he could license. "You wanted tuition," I said. "You wanted devotion. You wanted an audience." He opened his mouth and closed it. I do not know if he felt shame or simply the absence of applause. The Brotherhood never came back to our neighborhood. The yurt listing vanished. A month later, I saw an online post about a man selling 22 unsold crystals and a concept. He was moving to Reno. In the aftermath, I learned how revenge ripples. The film made it around the block and then out of it. Someone's cousin shared it with a friend who teaches media literacy, who used it as a case study in narratives of accountability. My inbox filled with stories. The country is full of people who have worn the cloak of humiliation in public and then hung it up to dry with a kind of courage that doesn't trend. They wrote to say, I needed to laugh. I needed a way to call it what it was without making myself the punchline. They wrote to say the word family in 100 voices. Found family, broken family, family like a stubborn weed that still flowers. And yes, because this is America, a podcast asked to interview me. I said no. I had done 1 season. That was enough. As for Marissa, we met with lawyers and then, tentatively, with a therapist whose office had a water feature that I did not trust. She apologized in 1,000 sentences that all meant, the person I was in the desert is not the person I wanted to be. I believed some of it and kept the rest for a winter day when hope needs kindling. We split the stuff. We split the dog on a schedule that made me feel like a child of divorce in a grown man's clothes. Pancake adjusted. Dogs are the opposite of toxic love. They love like there isn't a committee meeting about it later. People in the neighborhood treated me like a survivor of a small war. In some ways, it had been won. The war between the story I believed about us and the story she chose. I worked out at a gym where all the music is the soundtrack of men who say, "Let's go," through clenched teeth. I ate protein bowls like they contained absolution. I went to work and did my job better because nothing concentrates the mind like watching something you love collapse in slow motion. I dated a little. I learned that you can be respectful and still say no. I learned that red flags often come shaped like novelty throw pillows with quotes about the moon. Every so often, someone would ask if I regret the barbecue. I would say this: I regret living in a world where a spectacle feels like the only way to be believed, but I do not regret telling the truth loudly enough that even I could hear it. The conspiracy epilogue is this: I remain half convinced the HOA is run by lizard people, because how else do you explain the speed with which they mailed out a newsletter praising my civic-minded evening of community reflection, while also reminding people that trampoline nets must be beige? The human epilogue is better. On a Tuesday that smelled like rain and gasoline, I grilled a single steak on a small grill and ate it standing up like a man who did not yet trust chairs. I put a bowl out for pancake. The sky bruised purple. The cicadas rehearsed their small opera. My phone buzzed with a new message. It was a short video from Marissa. She was in a church basement, folding chairs into rows for a meeting I recognized by the earnestness of the lighting. "Step 1, she said, half smiling. "I can't fix the past, but I can tell the truth in the present." I watched twice and texted back 3 words that were less about her and more about the person I had been for months. Good, keep going. If you came here for a moral, here is mine in plain American. Closure is not something someone gives you in the desert or at a barbecue. It's something you make, like a sandwich, messy and sustaining. And regret? They have it in the ways that matter, in the long tail of employment where employers Google and donors watch documentaries before writing checks, in the quiet of holidays when the chair they wanted is at someone else's table. She said she needed 15 days to heal. I gave her a lifetime to remember what healing isn't. That's my revenge. Not ruin, just daylight. Not cruelty, just narrative. Not a victory parade, just the simple, ongoing refusal to build my future out of someone else's lies. In case you're counting keywords to file this under the right shelf in your head, yes, this was a cheating wife story, but also a family story, and a story about the ridiculous ways we try to upgrade our feelings like phones. It was betrayal in linen, toxic love with a day pass, infidelity with a playlist. It started at the end and ended where most American stories end. A cul-de-sac, a dog, a man scraping the last of the slaw from the tray, and the lights blurring into something almost kind.